Everyone. I'm Martin Routledge from Social Care Future. We've got a great little group of people with us here that I'll introduce properly in a moment. People are starting to come into our session, and Gaynor is going to keep admitting people as we do the introductions. This session runs till 3:30, dead on. We'll be leaving about 3:29, I think is our objective, if I've managed to chair it right. And I'm going to share my screen now. Could I just ask everybody if you could, as you come in, if you could put your microphones on mute, that would be great, apart from the panel. So welcome everybody to this session, which we've called A New Relationship with Communities Learning from Mutual Aid. I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping at the start before we get into the session. Some of you will have experienced this already, so apologies if I'm going through stuff you've heard already. So welcome, insert name of session, it's the one about mutual aid. Just in terms of practicalities, if you know somebody's struggling, they can ring our friend Wendy on that number there, and she'll help you out. Just as a reminder, we're recording all the sessions. So you know, if you're not supposed to be here, hide. Don't swear and don't do anything that you wouldn't want people to see. Please, can everybody go on mute if they've not already done so? You'd like to turn your video on, that's lovely, we'd love to see you, but if you go away, make a cup of tea or have a snack, remember to switch it off. If you want to see everybody, choose gallery view or speaker view for a big picture of the person that's speaking. Do use the chat for questions and comments. We're going to be saving the chat to help us. And just to remind people, people will be fed up of this by the end of the 3 days, I'm sure. But just to remind people of the Social Care Future vision, I'll read it out. We all want to live in the place we call home, with the people and things that we love, and communities where we look out for one another, doing things that matter to us. That's the vision that we're trying to bring to life through the Social Care Future movement. And one of the reasons that we're doing these sessions is for us to discuss and people to contribute to ideas about what that vision looks like in practice, and in particular help us to work out how to make it happen. And alongside the festival, we have an inquiry group that's convened by our colleague Anna Severite of people who use social care, a diverse group of people who use social care, and they are leading our inquiry, which is working on answering those questions. What does that vision look like if it's real? And what do we need to do to make it happen? And obviously the vision is quite different from traditional social care. So for this session, just to remind ourselves that our vision for social care future goes well beyond what might be described as traditional social care. Some of you will have heard of a guy called Edgar Kahn who developed time banks. And he said, no society has the money to buy at market prices what it takes to raise children, make our neighbourhood safe, care for older people. And that's true, isn't it? So we're going to have to connect what we're trying to do in social care with what gets called civil society, the things that people do together and for each other and with each other. And we're going to have to connect those things to public services which are doing different things than they do the things that they've traditionally done to some extent. And that's going to have to come together in a better and a more equal relationship if we want our vision to happen. So that's a big challenge. One of the things that many people have found inspiring over the past, I lose sight of how many months it is now, 8 or 9 months is it now that we've had this bloody thing going on? Over this period, one of the things that's happened in many places is the growth of what tends to get called mutual aid. And as an example of this, in my experience, soon after lockdown, my father-in-law, Alan, who's in his mid-80s. He suddenly had a heart attack, and he was admitted to hospital, leaving his not very physically fit wife at home. And obviously everybody was very worried about him being okay and getting good care in hospital, but he got that. Donna, you'll be proud to know that in a hospital that you have responsibility for. But there was a real practical problem. After that kind of first worrying stage, he needed some stuff. He needed his pajamas and his toiletries taken, and who's going to do it? We can't ask Brenda to do it. She's in her mid-80s, she's not fit, and there's this scary COVID thing going on. So I Googled and I came across Bolton Mutual Aid, and 7:30 one morning, I phoned them up and spoke to another guy called Alan. And within an hour, they'd been to my father-in-law's house, picked up his stuff and taken it to the hospital and gotten it to him. And I speak as a social worker, somebody who's worked in local government for more than 20 years. And I know that though we do many things well, we would never have been able to do that. So in thinking about what this experience of mutual aid might teach us, might suggest to us about making our vision happen, lots of questions come up. Did mutual aid only happen in some places, where, for example, they might be wealthy, or conversely, where people had a tradition of looking out for one another? Is it an amazing panacea, or is it more like a piece of the jigsaw? Could it turn into the state just expecting people to do something that they should do, etc., etc.? Lots of questions are begged by this, and I've been talking to lots of people like Zoe and Eve about this over the months, about these things. So what we're going to do is explore this today with some people who've got lots of relevant experience, and with you. So what we're going to do is start off with a discussion with the 4 people that we've got here, and then we're going to invite you in the chat to give us your thoughts or come up with questions that you've got, and then we're going to have a discussion with you and with the panel about those questions to help us think about what do we learn from mutual aid that's going to help us to move forward with our social care future vision. So I hope that's what you thought you were coming for today, because if it wasn't, maybe you need to jump off and go to a different session. But I hope nobody does that, by the way. One of the things about our panel today is that we're all very northern. So if there's anybody here from the south, I'm going to tell you about a few places up that part of the country, where you're supposed to be levelling up. So Zoe here comes from a small town called Marple, which is near a town called Stockport, and that's near this big place called Manchester, everybody, for people down south. Sometimes we call it the Independent Republic of Manchester, given recent events. Eve comes from Manchester as well. In fact, she lives just down the road from me. Zoe, sorry, I should have said, has been very actively involved in developing and supporting mutual aid over the past several months in Marple. And Eve is both a community activist in her community and a local councillor. Sometimes 2 roles that I suspect rub up against each other a little bit, Eve, but maybe you can tell us some more about that. Yeah. And then we've got Professor Donna Hall. She's a professor now, everybody. But not too long ago, she was Chief Executive of Wigan Council. And I suspect that many people who are on here today will have heard of the Wigan deal and the attempts that Wigan as a council over a number of years have been trying to take to shift the relationship between communities and public services, including the council. Donna's got a number of other roles, including she is chair of what's now been renamed New Local, but some people remember it as the New Local Government Network. And Warren is also from round here, as we say, and he's got a senior position with Devo Mank, the Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, and so he's operating at a strategy level across the partnership. But his job title is so long that we didn't have really time to share it with you this morning. He might want to give us a sense of what it is in a minute. Right, so we're going to kick off, and we're going to do this in 2 sections to start off with. One with Zoe and Eve, and one with Donna and Warren. But but they might get merged. And as we're having these conversations, do in the chat tell us what you're thinking, ask questions, offer opinions and thoughts, because we're going to need that for the session that we have later on with the full panel. All right. So, Zoe, do you mind if I start with you? Tell us a little bit about what it's been like living in Marple during COVID and what you did.
Right. Well, what's it? I'll say what I did. I don't know what it's been like. It's been crazy, like it's been for everybody else, hasn't it? Well, what happened before lockdown is that, so Marple's a town with a few villages around it of about 25,000 people. And obviously, like every other place, it has its own kind of Facebook groups and all that kind of thing where people talk to each other. So what happened was, before lockdown, people started worrying about the impending idea that lots of people were going to be told that they weren't allowed to go out and about. They're going to have to self-isolate or shield, which happened, didn't it, for lots of people, particularly people over 70. Now, people over 70 are kind of the backbone of Marple. Marple, it is demographically, they are people that make it run, really. They do everything. So suddenly Marple was without those people being able to actively do all the stuff that they do, and also lots of people going on to furlough. So we were particularly bothered about the small local businesses that people wouldn't be able to get to, that it was really important to them that they got their goods from there, and all those people who won't be able to get out and about. So we kind of reached out and asked who wanted to be helpful, and we got a list of about 220 people who said they would be about. We organised them into kind of different geographical WhatsApp groups. We set up a phone line and an email, and then we advertised all over the place. We got 8,000 leaflets through doors before official lockdown came in, and we basically said, if you're stuck and you need something, then give us a call and we'll help out. So we just managed to be the connect. Lots of people were doing that naturally, so that stuff was happening anyway. But I guess lots of people liked the option of ringing up. Maybe they didn't have neighbours that they felt comfortable asking, or lots of neighbours wanted to be able to do a little bit more. So we manned these phone lines. Originally we went on 7 days a week, and we went down to 5 days a week, but we took in calls. So we did a lot of, we still are doing prescription deliveries, shopping deliveries, but also a lot of emergency food parcels before the government ones came in. We worked with Asda. And so we've done something like 1,400 jobs for people over this time. We have also connected people just in a kind of organised, like there's a neighbour not too far away from you who, does an Asda shop every week, or there's somebody who'd be really happy to give you a call every week, and just set up lots of relationships. We've got about 40 odd of those that we've set up. So we're still open 6 hours a week. We run the phones now, and we're still getting calls in, and they are going up. But we've also done a fair bit to try and prepare people for the potential of a second lockdown. So we've done sort of newsletters out, and we've kind of talked to all the local shops, and a lot of them are adapting better, so they're able to deliver and so on. So it's very, very practical what we've done, really. It's just people were stuck in, a load of other people wanted to help, and we've connected it so that people can do that.
Brilliant, thanks, Zoe. So that's a nice kind of lead into this. I'm going to break my rules now and change how I was going to do this, because I know the panel are really flexible. But I'm going to come to Eve and ask her, tell us about your experience, what you've been up to, and then I'll come do the same with Donna and Warren, if that's all right. Go on, what you've been up to.
Yeah, so first of all, I know I was introduced as a councillor in Chorlton, but I guess first and foremost, I'm also just a resident. I'm not just a resident, I'm a resident, I'm a neighbour. I've got parents that live locally, I've got kids, and I think that's what I saw is certainly in a local place, so within Chorlton, how people care for the flock, and there's a real sense that people cared both for their family, their friends, their neighbours, but also an instinctive care for people that they've never met before, or maybe never even identified with before, and responded quickly. And what that looked like in practice was lots of similarities with what Zoe's described, but also some real differences, which I think is a key part of the learning, is that I can only speak from my experience with all those multiple hats from what happened in Chorlton. I've shared learning with others across Greater Manchester in other hats as well. But I think what was really clear was that it looked different for different people in different places. So similarities was that what we saw is a rapid response, and I've heard that all over the place, of people responded instinctively, just like that, to a crisis, and they felt that they had something to offer, they wanted to, they cared. And you know, in our space, that saw people rapidly set up, you know, Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. They became street connectors, so every street had somebody that would help be the person online that would coordinate to ensure there was also a face-to-face presence on their street, that they could also deliver flyers and meet those different needs. And we saw that happen kind of instinctively. It was something that people knew, and they organised and they played to their strengths. And that diversity of different mediums, different ways, was just played out, which I guess if you're an organisation, you're likely to sit down and go, what is the best way? And you might pick one way, whereas what we saw was just a whole host of different things happened. And then there was a sort of self-organising, and then ways of people connecting that together to do the same things, achieve the same things that, you know, Zoe talks about, but maybe in a slightly different, more self-organising way of people, you know, delivering food supplies or medical supplies to other people on their street, to people sharing information, because what we heard was there's quite an overwhelming glut of information, and it was really confusing, wasn't it? It still is really confusing. So some of it was also being able to, as a counsellor, it was helpful that I could get any information that I could via the council, via our community and voluntary sector organisations, via our statutory bodies, and that there was an easy channel in which, via these WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups, I could help translate that into a way that's hopefully more accessible, and that people could then, through word of mouth, through literally turning to their neighbour over a fence, or through flyers or through their own WhatsApp groups, help spread that information to provide some of the clarity and information that was helpful. So there's a practical delivery of goods, but also there's actually the spreading of information. And then also just, I think, that sense of care and people feeling that they weren't on their own, that there was a flock around them that were looking out for them and caring for them, and also, you know, a sense of hope in all of that. So lots of observations, but if you want to go on to Donna and Warren.
Yeah, thanks for that intro, Eve. I've already seen Zoe's cat's tail go past her. Donna, are you looking at one of your dogs down there?
Yeah, I've got two of them competing for attention. I'm so sorry. I didn't know whether it was visible or not, but I'm very sorry.
That's all right. No, we said to everybody at the start there'll be cats and dogs and kids. That's okay. So, Donna, tell us a bit about your past few months. You know, personally and your work life. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I think we've been we've just been overwhelmed, really, both where I live and also what we're picking up nationally about what's happening. I've just been on a call with I don't know if you've heard of them, but a think tank called Reform, and also the Demos work about resetting normal. And everyone, literally everyone, is seeing an increase in community spirit and in mutual aid. So it's brilliant to see that, but I think it shouldn't be taken for granted, and it should be seen as being a different way of working, I think, with local communities and civil society. And I think the places that were already doing it, like Wigan, like Oldham, like Manchester, and I'm sure there are others that I'm not aware of as well, some of the London boroughs, Camden and other places as well, where they already had that relationship going. And we've still got a huge amount of work to do, you know, and you know, we can't be complacent and just say, oh, there's mutual aids set up, that's it, we don't need to do anything else now as kind of public services. I think what we've got to do is look at the learning from how mutual aid has networked, and some of the great examples that Zoe and Eve have just highlighted. It's all about those spark plug people within those communities, of which Zoe and Eve are, you know, really great spark plugs, connecting people and making things happen. And, you know, very often people are doing that already. They're just doing it below the radar. It's not like the pandemic suddenly created mutual aid. It was, some of it was there already. But it's how do we learn from those networks, how they've developed, and how do we change public services to make better use of that and to invest in that different way of working. So, well, that's what we did in Wigan. We spent 10 years investing 13 million in community and voluntary sector projects like the ones that Eve and Zoe have just explained, you know, food banks. We set up preventative, supportive mental health projects to promote good mental health, to promote physical activity, and, you know, lots of prevention-based activities. And those ideas that were there were not the kind of ideas that we would have thought of ourselves. They were not kind of municipal projects or programs. They came very much from different community groups. So one example that springs to mind is a community environmental food recycling project, which came from one of our estates in Wigan and was run by two fantastic women. Really kind of, you do tend to find this, a lot of very strong, feisty women running these mutual aid groups. You know, they really care about the community, and, you know, Eve's an exception, but some of the they would never stand to be an elected member, you know, but they do really want to work in the local community. So I've been hearing great stories through our innovation exchanges in New Local about those great things, and it's fantastic to see. But we've got to make it part of our public service reform strategy as well.
Thanks, Donna. And now that you mentioned about feisty women, I'm going to go to Warren, who's our token bloke on the panel today. What have you been up to, Warren?
Yeah, I'll say first of all, just in case anybody's worried, there's definitely, there won't be any animals in shot from my end. My dog's too daft to figure out that he can climb the stairs here, so all I've got is that pile of ironing and the guitars behind me. So just a couple of similar reflections, I think, really. So given a bit of given the theme of the discussion today and thinking about it from a public service perspective, I think that there has been a reaction around mutuality and cooperation that's happened over the last few months that has some similarities in terms of its characteristics. So behind all of the things that you know, people will have seen around you know, command and control and public services operating in a crisis and all the rest of it, actually there's been a massive lowering of the guard across organisations and feeling that they're going to need help from each other and they're going to need to help each other. And what we've seen in public services in that context is really a kind of a much greater degree of openness and acceptance of sharing, of pooling resource, of being open with each other when they're in trouble, and being supportive to each other when they're in trouble. So all those kind of characteristics that, you know, Donna and Zoe and Eve had described as normal human reactions, really. You know, this is what happens. There are always people who want to help, aren't there? And the same thing has started to affect the way that public services relate to each other. And obviously, I've been in the context of my job, I've I guess had the role of helping public services collaborate across Greater Manchester for about 15 years, and you can see why it makes sense, because the minute you put two sets of organisations together, you've got twice the brains, you've got twice the capacity, you've got twice the opportunity of sharing different things. And whilst we get comfortable with that on a public service to public service basis, actually the same principles apply around doing public service differently, and fundamentally transforming the relationship between public services and the residents that they serve. And it feels much more challenging to us to apply the same principles around, well, actually, the minute we start engaging with residents differently, we do generate new ideas, we get fresh insights, it unlocks capacity that we cannot create or replicate in public service. So it gives us quite a difficult choice, doesn't it, then, of saying, actually, we can either turn our face away from the potential, the opportunity, the additional skills, capabilities, insights and ideas that are different relationships with residents would offer us, and retrench into the kind of operations that we've been used to, which was largely kind of doing to and being transactional, or we can get into some very different territory and do with and work through and move from, kind of transactions to trust, and move from inputs into values and experiences and thinking differently about the way that we use resources. And the minute you get into that, you start to get into the really kind of challenging thing is if we were serious about this, what would it mean for the way that we commission services and distributed allocations and resources? Because that shift from transaction to trust means that you've got to get into a place where actually you see providers and commissioners in very different places. You see residents operating very different roles. You see communities taking on, being supported to take on much greater responsibilities, and you reduce the level of transaction and I guess kind of contracting. So it means that we would collapse the idea of what commissioning might mean, and get comfortable with that and do that safely, because the risk is you either go for an offloading big society type approach, or you think actually there's a new deal to be had here. So it ought to be quite scary and challenging for us, because it's a fundamentally different set of rules around how we see commissioning provision and the relationship with communities. But these kind of conversations and some of our recent history, actually, the Wigan deal's a great example, isn't it? There is a bit of a route map there that we could make more use of, that's changed the relationship. That idea of the deal, reciprocity, different relationships with communities and public services. There are examples in Salford around working with the VCSE very differently. So I just think we've got to kind of recognise the opportunity, recognise the choices that gives us as leaders in public services, and then understand how we can take those kind of safe but exciting steps into doing it differently, because there is loads of experience there if we were really serious about adopting it and spreading it.
Thanks, Warren. So I'm going to I want to come back to your commissioning thing in a bit, if that's all right. But thanks everybody for the comments that you're starting, questions that you're starting to put in the chat. So I'm going to build a little bit on one of the themes that's kind of emerged from that first conversation and ask people to come at it from the different experiences. So Simon, who says he's asking for a friend, says, how does mutual aid differ from the much derided concept of big society? And Nick says, many councils like mutual aid groups, but they don't trust them as partners in the jigsaw of responses because they're so organic and unstructured. Is it a choice of mutual aid groups behaving more like part of the system, or risk being outside of the system and the kind of resources and coordination? So that big question of the kind of the freedom to operate with mutual aid and its relationship with local state. Sorry, I'm going to come to you first to see whether you've had any experiences in your activity over the past few months that kind of speak to that question of is it the big society and what's the relationship with local state? You have to unmute though. How many times have you been told that?
I think the slightly easier one is the relationship with the state, and I don't know if it's a bit, because, well, I think that it's possible to get a bit, and it might be we've just had a reasonably positive experience, but a little bit worried about the relationship with councils. I think that it felt like where we were doing this stuff, we weren't asking permission, we didn't need anything from the council. We had like the Rotary Club give us a bit of money and things like that. So that put us on quite a firm footing that we were legitimate, we were the place that people came to, and the kind of state had to fit around us. Now that's not a, that was just how it was, and we've got a perfectly good relationship with Stockport Council, and we do work between, so it's not a negative thing. But I think community sort of mutual aid groups can get quite caught up in that relationship and that dynamic, and they may be a little bit too bothered about it. And I think when you come at it like that, and if we can build a relationship based on that kind of equal power, we're not asking for anything from the council. It might be that if this were to continue, it probably would need funding or something, but at the minute it's okay. So I think all you want back from the state is a kind of a human relationship with it. You don't want your community power to be harnessed. You want to be recognised as somebody like fairly tired and exhausted, trying to coordinate a really complicated thing. You know, you do want that kind of human relationship, and for them to understand that it is different here, and it's also can feel quite fragile at times. And I think that's probably an important message from, you know, I've always worked in statutory services, so this is what I've learned, and I want to relook at all the stuff. We developed some materials just before lockdown with another organisation around power shifting with communities, and I really want to go back and read those now, and I'm sure I'll find half of it really annoying, because I think sometimes the kind of language around communities and asset-based responses and all that kind of things does kind of alienate real grassroots people who are just doing what needs doing and aren't looking for permission for it or validation for it. I can't even remember. The Big Society was just...
No, don't worry about that one.
Sorry, like 10 years ago, wasn't it? So yeah, it's like...
Yeah, I remember it very, very well, being at the Department of Health when it came out, and
yeah.
I've been going on about social capital, and all of a sudden I had a moment, 15 minutes of fame, but it went away quite quickly. Eve, you've been kind of right at the boundary, haven't you, between being a kind of local community activist and being, you know, part of the local state in a sense. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I think the key words have been trust, freedom, and relational. So that's the difference for me, and that's what I've seen. So when I've seen it work really well, and I have to say I have, and I think for lots of the kind of conditions that are in place within the neighbourhood, but then in Manchester, I've learned from Wigan in terms of they've got our Manchester, so there's some key principles there around kind of the equality between community and statutory services, and then I think also in terms of Greater Manchester and the devolution and the, you know, a lot of the work that Warren's doing in terms of integration of health and social care, there's a lot of ingredients there that created a space in which there was a belief in the need for trust and for giving people freedom and for having that level of kind of human interaction, which meant that at its best, and it's ebbed and flowed over the 8 to 9 months, at its best, it felt that everybody was part of that flock that I described, like they're just part of the other starlings. So whether you are somebody on the street as a neighbour, a community leader, whether you're somebody there in a, you know, as a statutory part of the statutory body in a professional role as a social worker, or a GP, whether you're there from the community, you felt that they were all part of the flock, and we literally all sort of sometimes stepped forward, sometimes stepped back, sometimes stepped to the side, took it in turns between us to adapt to what was the emerging need at that moment, and to whatever strengths and expertise was needed in that moment. And I've genuinely seen that work really, really well at points, and that relies on that need for that continuous communication between people to be able to understand when, you know, as Zoe referred to, that fatigue, when actually the local community response, people are on their knees, or there's gaps opening, or those threads are too bare, you know, then there's the need maybe for others to step forward from maybe a community group or from the statutory sector, but to know quickly to step back when others can do it for themselves. And I think where one of the other key differences is, you know, you've talked about it's not the mobilizing. I've heard that we need to mobilize people. Like, no, people mobilize themselves. Don't mobilize them. Don't tell them. Don't seek to pass on responsibility to them. Don't tell them what to do. Enable them, support them, give them the air cover, ask them what they need, what matters to them, and provide that role in wrapping around, and that sense of equality is what feels then very different. And I think somebody put in the chat, you know, it's that difference between old power and new power, and we've seen that. So it's the far more cooperative, relational, human interaction, where it's not hierarchical. It is far more like a flock of starlings, and that has worked a treat at lots of points, but it relies on that trust across the system.
So I'll come back to the flock of starlings in a little while. I mean, I think from things that both of you have said, I mean, I've spent a lot of time talking to people over the past few months who are people who need some support to have a decent life in their communities, and people who are public servants trying to respond to COVID, and people's experiences have been very different. A lot of people's experiences have been quite bad in terms of their relationship with the public servants and services that they've engaged with. There have been people who've been telling much more positive stories, and broadly speaking, although I don't want to try and kind of quantify it too much, those places that had been investing in a range of different kinds of relationships with people, groups, voluntary organizations, etc., over quite a few years, that the people that I spoke to living in their areas were telling quite different stories from people in the places, which is the majority of places which hadn't done that. I think that I'm just looking at some of the questions, some of the comments that people are making in the chat. One of them is about where do we go from here? And I know, Zoe, that's a conversation that you and I have had a bit. So Sue in the chat said the challenge is to keep new groups going that want to keep going. Fatigue set in and volunteers returning to work. Pembrokeshire community groups have created a network. Public service is much more open to collaborating with the third sector since COVID, recognising our crucial role. Finance must be looked at, as Warren says. So there's kind of questions about what people want to do as COVID eventually recedes, and what support they might need to be able to do it if they want to do it. I know you've kind of been reflecting on that a little bit.
Me, yeah.
Yeah.
We went through a whole, because when everything went quiet, we did a whole survey of everybody, talked to people about what it should be in the future, and people really loved the sense of neighbourliness. They loved the connections they got. They loved how it made them feel about living here. And they obviously found it handy to have the practical support, or, they really enjoyed it. But you do need a real purpose. And I think our core purpose has been around, we're quite narrow. We're not, I think what's happening in Chorlton and other places is much broader. What we do is quite practical and quite narrow. And I think rather than evolve into something, I'm more thinking, I think we want to leave a really good legacy behind. So I'm thinking, because we couldn't carry on doing like what we're doing forever, because it just is completely unsustainable. But I think the legacy is probably going, for us, it would be, because we are very sort of centralised really, going to more sort of street-based or much smaller self-organising, creating the conditions that whatever was left behind could be much more self-organising, and connecting and giving opportunities to all the people who've come forward, whether that's people who've needed a hand or people who've wanted to give one, to carry on getting that. And
if you needed
forming a group, because once you form a constituted group and need money and all that kind of stuff, you're a completely different being with a completely different relationship. And there already are those organisations, and I'm not sure we'd.
And to create that different kind of self-organising, self-sustaining thing, would you need any help? And if so, what kind of help might that be?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, you need the time and capacity to think with each other and talk to people and do some stuff. Yeah. But you don't need any money or any, Okay.
So I'm going to come to Donna and Warren a bit about this. So Joe from York, I think it's Joe from York, isn't it? Says, what are the panel's views on new and old power, i.e. the traditional voluntary sector, old power, not always welcome mutual aid, new power? There'll be lots of people here, like me, who, I've seen these terms, old power and new power, but, I haven't read much about it. Why should we be interested in these ideas of new and old power? And is it just some new jargon, or is there something serious here, that follows up on Warren's points about public services behaving differently, more human and in a more relationship way, and starting from what matters to communities rather than what the public sector thinks is right. And haven't we just talked about this for so long and not done it? You know, what's going to be different? What are we going to make that make different? Sorry, that's a really big question. I'll give it to Donna and Warren.
That's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, yeah, we have done a lot of talking about it, and the old power, new power thing's been around for a long time. Big society, I don't even know what it was. I think it was just 2 words, wasn't it, stuck together? It didn't really mean anything. And I think, you know, some people, like Zoe's group, doesn't need any money, but some places would need money. Do you know what I mean? I think every place is different. And I think we've lost something in the evolution of public services over the last 10, 20 years, even maybe, where we've just become very focused on seeing people as a unit of need that we need to fix, haven't we? And that we can prescribe or socially prescribe something that will make them better. And we deal with just one little aspect of people's lives. But what Zoe and Eve have described is enabling us, is people just helping each other and getting on with it. They might not need support, they might need support. I mean, again, I'll just go back to the Wigan thing. We tried to deprogram people's brains, you know, social workers and children's and adult social workers, GPs, people who worked in hospitals, because you are trained to see people in a very through a very narrow lens. So I think what the growth of mutual aid has done is it's unravelled some of that stuff, and people have just, you know, the culture's shifted, and we've gone more to a new power, which is more devolved, more enabling. People have just got on with it and done it because they've had a common cause. And going back to the idea about purpose and Zoe's idea about defining purpose, the purpose has been supporting people to get through this horrific time. So, you know, I do think we have an awful lot of bureaucracy. You know, Martin knows my views on commissioning. It doesn't work. You know, in my new world, my new power is commissioning is dead. You know, we've got to listen differently. We've got to use anthropology, and we've got to completely change the way that that citizen state contract has got to be subverted.
So let's explore that a bit, and picking up Warren's point about commissioning. I'm sorry, Donna, I'm going to talk about commissioning for a minute. You know, you can talk about commissioning in different ways, can't you? You can talk about commissioning as a role or whatever. But the truth is that so long as there are public services, there are going to be people making decisions about what those public services do and how they spend the money and stuff. And we can call it something else if we like, but that won't change it. It doesn't seem to me on its own. And the stuff that you were talking about, Warren, about, you know, human, and you were talking, Eve, about, you know, the relationship-based connections between public servants and local communities. We seem to find it really, really hard, don't we? What actually can we do differently that might make this happen in more places for more people? Because it isn't happening in most places for most people. Go on, Warren. You answer that one then.
I think, because where my head is on this at the moment is, I do think I think we've got to recognise we've got to recognise the challenge alongside the opportunity, because I think this is, I'm seeing kind of live debate and just reflecting on Zoe's experience of thinking, actually, as somebody who's you know, has got a significant amount of expertise in this area, even hearing Zoe say, actually, if I went back to things I wrote 8 months ago, I might fundamentally revisit them. And I think it just shows the kind of the pace of the learning. So I'm thinking of I'm reflecting, I think, on a couple of recent examples of where I've seen that people's sense of commissioning shifting and people reacting in very different ways. And when I say that, what I mean is I think them genuinely kind of exploring. I'm not sure what I'm commissioning through and with anymore. And there's part of me thinks that that's quite exciting. And there's part of me is reflecting that I've got a real chance here that I could break the spell or destroy the magic that I think I'm trying to tap into, because I think instinctively the way that we'll have been taught to commission will bureaucratize or turn into an aspect of the state the thing that we that we tapped into and excited us about working differently with residents and communities. And I think people are alert to that risk, but don't yet have the kind of literacy, experience, self-confidence to do it differently. And I'm thinking of a debate that was happening with some quite senior people that were all directors of adult social services, and the debate was veering between, well, we can't just give them money without knowing what they're doing, and half the room saying we can absolutely give them money without knowing what they're doing, because we know them and we trust them to do magical things. We just can't predict, and we can't preempt what they will do with it. And actually, that's only a matter of months ago. And these are people who talk about asset-based working, about personalisation, about strengths-based approaches. But you can see the self-confidence is really the self-confidence in acting in that way, and backing it with the way that you backing it and backing it with resource, and it is something where that self-confidence is only really marginally starting to spread now. I think there is an opportunity that the COVID experience might take us on a significantly accelerated journey, but we've got to harness it, and we've got to come up with new words and help build that sort of self-confidence. So if you think of one of the things that Donna and I have spoken about recently, got to recognise the public service has been it's been coached, trained, and built in terms of transactions and hierarchies. And actually what we're doing here is saying you're going to have to upend all of that, because you're going to have to construct your new way of working on the basis of trust, relationships, and networks. And you'll get more power, strength, positivity, ideas, and benefit out of networks than you'll ever be able to commission on a traditional hierarchy. And,
so I'm seeing, Warren, so in the chat, I'm seeing people like Jenny and Victoria kind of echoing the challenge. We're not problems to be fixed, and you're trying to get public services to behave differently so they don't treat people as problems to be fixed. But let me ask you, Donna, I see Joe in the chat who's head of commissioning saying, he's not going to have a job, it sounds like. But so if you change the title of Joe's job, or give him a new job, because he sounds like a good bloke, Joe. What, as public servants, what would you actually do differently, and how can you get public services to make this, really kind of fundamental set of shifts?
I think it would be moving away from commissioning to co-production with communities, looking at the things that can be done better by communities, by, groups that may have sprung up during the pandemic, but also stuff that's been going on for many years before that. And some of them might not need money, some of them might do that. But this whole idea of sitting in a darkened room, writing a spec, putting it out to tender, inviting the cheapest, or it just doesn't speak.
And what can drive that change? Because I'm sorry, Donna, to interrupt. I'm just conscious that this is a kind of model we've operated for hundreds of years, isn't it? And people get their jobs on the back of it, and they get sacked if they don't do it, and such like. What are the kind of levers that need to be pulled to make it possible to behave like that?
I think we need to think about, just go back, and local government isn't perfect, don't get me wrong, but think about the way that councils both commission and provide within the same organisation. So they co-design, they sit and listen to residents and ask, or most of them do, and then listen to them and change the way that they do things. So, rather than having this strange commissioner provider split that we have in the NHS, it's ineffective, it's expensive, and we don't get the right outcome. So in my career, innovation has sprung from sometimes the most unlikely places, and then the CCG have gone away to write a spec to kind of capture that innovation, and it's just a silly dance. So I think that we've got a lot of brilliant creativity within our community sectors, and it's about tapping into that and believing in it. It takes some courageous leadership to dismantle, as Warren's just explained, the kind of years and years of ingrained silo working that we've got. We saw during the early stages of the pandemic, didn't we, the dysfunctionality between the NHS and social care, where people were discharged into care homes. So the priority was protect the NHS, almost like it's a religion rather than a service. So we've got to completely debunk some of that. The NHS needs a huge transformation and change. I think it's shown it isn't fit for purpose. We've got to make it much more about place, anchor institutions working together with primary care and with local people and schools and businesses.
Thanks. So you picked up on leadership. Sorry, I'm sorry. It's not like I'm interrogating just you on your own, Donna, but it might feel like that for a minute. You picked up on the issue of leadership there, and leadership at different levels, of course. But how does it happen, that leadership? Because I see people like you, and I see a number of other people in places who are managing to make some inroads into the way that public services work that are much more in this direction. But there's still the minority, it seems to me, and I'm just not sure what will change that. What will lead that to change?
I think it's about leaders in organisations nurturing the spark plug people that you have within those organisations, and people like we've got on this call today. You've got to grow people like that who are positive deviants. The people who want to change the way that we work, and no one comes into public service to fill in forms, do they? But we kind of lose something as we get through all the training, and inspection doesn't help. People are terrified of the next Ofsted inspection or CQC inspection, so they feel that their job is compliance rather than relating to people differently, thinking about people as a whole person rather than just that little thing that they've come in with presenting need. Thinking about, we did something 20 years ago in Chorley called Circles of Need. I don't know, it's quite famous in its time, but it was like a precursor of the deal. And that thinking is still being thought about but not being put into action. So it frustrates me immensely that people talk the talk, but when it comes to actually making it happen, they don't give people that, they don't provide that leadership, because it takes a lot to subvert the way that we've all been brainwashed into delivering things separately. It does, but it's crucial.
So Warren, I see you trying to get in, and I don't know if it's on this point, but what's going through my mind is, how do you do that then? Is it about mentoring or recruiting people differently, or what is it?
Well, the point I wanted to make on that was, and I don't know whether Donna knows this, but I did the deal training, and I just had an amazing experience through it, actually, because what stood out from me was some quite specific elements of it that were, and it was coming sort of indirectly from Donna and from Stuart Cowley at the at Wigan Council, about permission and people being told that they were recruited for their values, and that they would be trusted to do the right things. If you go about it this way, we will back you, and it's our expectation that you trust yourself to be able to do the right things. And the reason that kind of stood out for me is because it reminded me that 25 years before, on my first day as a neighbourhood housing officer, my area manager sort of drove me out into the middle of the estate and said, we've got loads and loads of policies and procedures, and you might worry about whether you can get your head around them all. He said, but that wasn't the reason I recruited you. I recruited you for your values, and the only thing I need to know from you is that you're engaged with the people who live here, and you take the prompt from them on what would make a difference and what would make the place better. And as long as you're doing that, I'll back you all the way. And it was just that kind of trigger of sort of 25 years of public service, and then getting the reminder through the Wigan deal and thinking, actually, I think there is a relatively straightforward way through this, but it will be about kind of permission and trust.
Thanks, Warren. Now, we're coming towards the end of our time. I can carry on this for a while. I don't know about you lot. But thanks so much for everybody who's been putting things in the chat, offering their ideas and reflection. We're going to save all that, and it's going to be made available to our inquiry group, who are going to look at everything, all the ideas that people are providing for us, so it won't be lost. And I'm sorry that I haven't been able to bring it all into this conversation. But because we're at our last few minutes, I just want to give the panel an opportunity. If you could offer a bit of advice to the Social Care Future Inquiry that are trying to make our vision real in this space of how we bring differently operating public services and communities and civil society to get a better and different relation. What would be a kind of top bit of advice to us from your experience? I should have given you that question before, shouldn't I? I'm sorry. What's your reflections? Go on, Eve.
I'm happy to jump in, Martin,
Yeah.
because really I think it's the same question. So in another hat, in my GM moving hat, in which we're looking at how we design in moving more as part of everyday work, life and play. We're asking all exactly the same questions as are others across Greater Manchester in different streams, and lots of things that we're talking about here in terms of absolutely how we help provide both the protectors within the system, so those that, like Donna talked about, who help ensure that others don't come in and crush the oxygen out, the energy out. Somebody Hannah referred in the chat to, sometimes that is other politicians, and I've had to be a protector on various occasions over the last 8 months where I've had to hold others back who, through their own whether you call it institutionalization or whatever, they come from a place of needing the control, of fear that they can trust people, and you need protectors in there who can say absolutely trust people, hold back, you're not needed here. We also need those to support the capabilities and capacity that Donna talked about, and that's what we're doing, providing that sort of support and training for people to take a coaching based approach. Some of that lingo around, absolutely, around strength based, but in practice, absolutely doing that in practice. And then we need to provide those spaces that people can connect with each other to hold their nerve, because it's hard, you're resisting, we're making massive change, we're absolutely turning tankers, and that means people, you can't be in a bubble and then step out of your bubble and face all the normal resistance and structural systemic challenges. So we need to keep creating spaces where people can reflect with others, share what's going wrong, recognize that things won't always work out well, and say that's okay. So I think there's a comment around metrics. Yes, we can find ways that we can measure this, tell those stories, but we also need to know that they've got, and the belief is there, so they can carry on and act in the way that we know is going to make a difference. But yeah, I'd love to pick up that conversation, Martin, because it was lots of learning.
Yeah, thanks, Eve. Now, we have to switch off dead on past, so we've got 3 minutes left for other members of the panel if you've got pearls of wisdom for our inquiry team. It's like Warren and Donna. Yeah, go on, Warren.
Yeah, agree with everything that Eve said, and we'll back all the stuff about spark plugs and stories and permissions and all the rest of it. The other thing I think is not underestimating the power of finding some new verbs to describe things, and thinking of what we've covered really, and moving away from fund, monitor, manage to enable, support, invest in, trust, and trying to get those into the language of public service.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Yep. Zoe or Donna? Donna, you've unmuted.
Yeah, I think just what is the future if we don't do this? We're absolutely knackered. Going back to the time banks example, there isn't anything else that we can do. This is the only way. It really is. And stop talking about governance and pooled budgets and just do it.
Thanks, Donna. Zoe, are you feeling on the spot or?
I don't think there's anything new to add. I think naturally, if you go back to people and communities, they're common sense, they're pragmatic, they're inclusive, and they want to reach out. And I think if public services could use those values to redesign how they organise what they do, then and go back to those values, we probably build a better welfare system for people who do need a bit more help than neighbours can give each other freely.
Oh, thanks, Zoe. Yeah, so I mean, let's hope that this current experience is providing some energy and some fresh thought that will animate the push that you four have talked about. Right, thanks so much. We're going to have to finish. Thanks for everybody who's contributed on the chat. Thanks to the panel, and I hope to see you on another session over the next 3 days. I'm rushing off to my next one. See you soon. Bye.
Nice.